What's going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to Game Day Grace, the podcast where faith and sports combine in powerful conversations. David, Schiele, Cory, Mose with you. And joining us today on the Believer's Bench is someone who is so special, so incredible, a queen, as everybody likes to say. She calls everybody queens and kings, but she herself is a queen. Rachel Joy Baribeau is here with us on the Believer's Bench. Now, Rachel is somebody who has done all kinds of amazing things. We're going to get into everything that she has done on earth and for the kingdom today. Yeah. We're going to go over all of that. She is a best-selling author. She has a book called Relentless Joy. Mm-hmm. She was the first female host on ESPNU, Sirius XM, right? Mm-hmm. She's got an amazing, amazing campaign, I'm Changing the Narrative. We're going to get into that as well. And then, most importantly, last but not least, a woman of God. So, yes. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. How you doing? How's it going?
I'm blessed, man. I got up. I got another day. You know, I start my days, I open my eyes, and I just thank God for another day. You know, I heard somebody say recently, and I've been speaking on this for the past couple of months, is that, you know, did you have a bad day or did you have a bad 15 minutes that ruined your entire day? And I say that to say that I am tired of surrendering entire days to the enemy, and I refuse to do it anymore. And so when I get up, I tell myself, this day will never come again. I will never be at this moment in time. My kids will never be at this moment in time. The sunrise will never be the same. My husband will never be. I will never get this day again, and I refuse to surrender it to the enemy. And so it has been such a powerful perspective shifter for me. And even before then, I'm just, you know, I love God, love people, you know, tremendously. And, but yeah, I'm great. I'm blessed.
Did y'all feel the shift in the atmosphere in those quick 45 seconds?
Nah, for real though.
Did y'all feel that? I forgot to add that she's an inspirational speaker. That's where that came from. So I want to get straight into I'm Changing the Narrative, because that is such a huge, huge part of your branding. Tell us how that came to be, and really the root of it, I think, was college football was breaking your heart, that story.
Yeah. I in 2016 I just moved to Nashville, just bought my first house. And I was, you know, so excited. I was broadcasting from the Batman building downtown where the NHL hockey team plays and Sirius studios are. And I remember, you know, that summer was so dark. It was Baylor, Penn State. There were guys getting in trouble all over the country. There were coaches getting in trouble, domestic violence, sexual violence. And I thought, my gracious, this sport that I've given my life to, that I have, you know, dedicated my life to, all it was negative, 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 negative news. And I heard God whisper to me, I made you to be a do something girl. And right around that time, there was a story in the news, and the young man has totally rehabilitated his life. And I'm very proud of him. And I'd like to hug him one day. And I think that'll be a moment. But there was a story of a player at Mississippi State that was caught striking a woman on camera. And he was only suspended, cherry-picked the games that he was suspended, non-conference games. And I was sitting in the grocery store parking lot, and all of a sudden, like a hot poker, it came back to me the night in my 20s where I was drug across the house by my hair by somebody who claimed to love me. And there were other people in the house that night, other men, and no one helped me. And I've never been interested in outing anybody. I've never said a name. I've never done any of those things, because people move on and they make good of their lives. But something that I thought I had put to bed came right back up. And so I wrote an article that you just referenced, College Football is Breaking My Heart, and it went viral. And I thought, and I say this, you know, I said I created a curriculum right around that time. Baby, it wasn't a curriculum. It was a 2-page Google Doc. Like, do not curse the days of small beginnings. And it was like, what makes your heart beat faster? What were you born for? If you think you were only born to play sports, what a shame that is. And so many young men believe that, and young women, particularly young men. And so I thought I would take it into high schools, but a friend of mine who was Nick Saban's mental man for 27 years, Dr. Kevin Elko, said, oh no, I called Jimbo Fisher at FSU and he wants you. And I'm like, what? Get out of town. Like, I didn't even put 2 and 2 together that I was a college football reporter and I could take it into colleges. I thought I would start in high schools. And so that happened in August 26th, 2016, and it's going to make me cry. But since then, I've worked in 80 plus colleges, many of them multiple times. I now work with Customs and Border Patrol, law enforcement. I work in prisons, maximum security prisons. I broke into the NFL last year and am now going to speak to every representative from every team at the combine next month. And I speak in churches, high schools, halfway houses. And it's everything from soul care, which is deeper than self-care, good love for yourself and others, finding what sets your soul on fire, mental health, joy, purpose. And I'm still in awe every single day of what God has done with this little idea. And here's what I'll say to people, because I always invite them into a podcast, to a story when I speak. Sometimes your greatest pain, it's your greatest purpose is born from your greatest pain. And so had I never been drug across the house by my hair like that, I never would have wrote about it. I never would have felt compelled to go, and I never would have started this movement. And so while it was very painful, I'm so grateful in the weirdest way that it happened, because it allowed me and God to launch this movement and help so many people get set free and help save people's lives, y'all.
And you said something that I'm intrigued about, in the sense of a lot of athletes may think that their sole purpose is to play a sport. When you talk to these college teams and NFL players, is that a overwhelming theme of the brokenness that you see a lot?
Yeah, and it is. And I'll never forget, I was at Tennessee early on in the movement, and this player comes up, because what happens is I don't speak and leave. If I can help it, I've learned, unless I have to go back to another gig or another speaking engagement, I'm going to stay. And sometimes we stay for hours, and I'm going to stay till the last player wants to talk. And they are the gift that God has given me is that something in me makes people feel safe and comfortable. And so I've been told over and over again that players and people, like, I feel comfortable within moments of meeting you, telling you my deepest, darkest junk. So, you remind me of my mama, you remind me of my aunt, you're maternal, you're warm, coach, ma, aunt, they call me all these things. And so I remember after speaking to Tennessee, this player comes up to me, and, he's tall and he's talking to me, and he said, "Thank you for saying that I have worth outside of football." He said, "Because where I come from, I only have worth if I throw a tight spiral, or if I make the catch, and I don't believe, here's the thing, I want to say this to parents. I don't believe many people mean to do that. I don't think that families mean to do that, mean to make a player, both a king or a queen, feel that way. But I think that is what happens, right? And we don't say, "No, you're smart, you're kind, your soul is beautiful, you're strong. I'm proud of you for every other thing that you do besides play football or baseball or basketball." So then we start to glorify the sport and the athlete, and we forget to glorify every other part of his soul. Okay, his soul. And then we got young men out here, all ages and races and backgrounds, that don't love themselves, have never been taught about loving themselves. And this player stands in front of me, and I could just see the tears were just right on the edge of his eyeballs. And they're about to come over. Then I'm crying, then he's crying, and we're hugging. And it was such a powerful moment, because I reminded him of all the worth in his soul besides being athletic.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
Wow.
amazing. I bet that's something that a lot of people struggle with, but don't have the outlet to get that out. And so thank you for going around the country and allowing that opportunity for athletes to do so.
And thank you for saying that. And I always tell people, thank you for having the heart to get it. There's some people that still don't get what I do, and that's okay, because their heart's closed, and that is okay. And it is why I walked away from sportscasting. People are like, I get the hands down question I get a lot is, do you miss sportscasting, especially with like the college football playoff just happening? I have 5 years of memories hosting the college football playoff. Was the first to do that. And I said, I don't miss it, because I'm still in sports, but I'm in there in a much deeper and more profound way than calling a game. I'm in there for generational change and love and acceptance and forgiveness. I can't tell you the amount of my athletes, like, I've had athletes call me when they're babies, been born, athletes at my wedding, athletes getting my husband dressed for my wedding. You know what I mean? Like, I've been at their weddings, they've been at mine. I'm in their lives. And so I don't miss it. And I wouldn't go back. And I can say this with absolute certainty. If ESPN called me today and said, "Will you come back and I've got $1 million contract for you?" I wouldn't take it, because I love what I do that much.
How difficult was that decision to step away from broadcasting? Because I know that must have been a passion for you. That's why you got into it. That's why we all get into it. And so, knowing that you're leaving a passion, but for God's kingdom, like how difficult was that decision?
It's a really good question. There was a soul moment, and I don't know if either one of y'all have ever had this, where it's like a conflict of the soul, where God is like asking you, like, who are you? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Like, it's like that fork in the road, right?
Hmm.
And so it was. I had just spoken at LSU, and one of the players stayed afterwards, and of course told me his whole life story. And I was working for Sirius, and I was covering the Alabama LSU game. Well, LSU beat Alabama at Tuscaloosa. So afterwards, I stick a mic in his face, and I could see the confusion come across his eyes. And it was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Last week you were just at my college and I was telling you all my deepest, darkest secrets. Now you're sticking a microphone in my face. The confusion and the fear was that I was going to go use some of that on the air. And it was like, and God had been talking to me for about a year, and I had been running from him, because we run from God sometimes in our calling. And I was like, no, God, I'm gonna get this job and this job. And there were jobs that, with all of my experience, I should have been a shoo-in for. And I say, mask off, be vulnerable. I kept getting doors slammed in my face. And I'm like, what's going on? God was slamming the doors in my face, because that is not where I was supposed to go. And so after that game, I had already written my retirement letter. It was in my phone, and I called my business manager and I said, I can't do this anymore. This is my last season. I can't do it anymore. And I said, God wants me to do this. This is what he wants me to do. He wants me to do it full time. I thought that I would always be a sportscaster. I thought I'd be doing it for the rest of my life. But I found what sets my soul on fire. And I loved sportscasting. But what I learned was that was a runway, 17 years, and all the relationships and all the goodwill and all the stuff I learned and the hardship and all the things I went through were a runway for what I do now. It was setting it up for what I do now, to have trust and respect and have those relationships. And so, yes, it was hard because I was afraid. Yes, it was hard because I was on air. And I remember writing my boss a letter at Sirius, and I'm like, I'm retiring after the end of the season. He's like, what? Is this a prank letter? I'm like, no. I'm like, because who does that? Who retires while they're on Sirius, But I did it. And then the next year, y'all, was 2020. And I was like, yeah, 2020 is my year. Yeah. No, it wasn't. I lost every one of my speaking engagements in a 2-week period, and my whole year was planned out. And then I would go on to lose my house. I'd lost my mom the year before. I hit the bottom of the barrel. And I'm actually really, really grateful that that also happened to me, as hard as it was, because I can relate to people who have been addicts. I can relate to people who have lost everything. I can relate to people who have lost their parents, because I've lost both parents. I can relate to people who have nothing, nothing, financially. I can relate to all of that. So as hard as those things were, I'm actually incredibly grateful that I've been through each one of them, so I can relate to other people.
With that being said, having heard you speak for the last, 10 or so minutes, I'm hearing that, you've suffered loss with loved ones financially, addiction, and domestic violence. Throughout all of those things, how did you stand firm on your faith and stand firm in the word? Because usually people go through that stuff and they abandon their faith and they say, there's no way a good God could let all of this happen to me. So how did you just stay convicted in your beliefs?
I will tell you, it was a little part of me, but 95% of it was God never giving up on me. What I love about God is, and I've preached on this before, the prodigal son. I've been the prodigal daughter 1,000 times. I heard something the other day. I loved it. It said, stop rehearsing your speech and just come home. He's got a ring and a robe for you. A lot of us have been sold this idea, this vengeful, mad God. He just wants you to come home. He's got a ring and a robe. He's fattened a calf. He's going to have a party. You know what I mean? Like, there's dancing. And so for me, it was God the entire time saying, even in my iniquity, even in my grossest, lowest, saddest form as an addict, he never left me. He always kept calling me saying, I love you. I created you for more. There's so much hope and peace and joy on the other side of this. And so I think, I don't think, I know faith was a huge part of it, but even in my iniquity, even in my lowest parts, it was him reaching in for me. You know, we tell people this lie, oh, reach out for help. And it's not a lie. We want people to do that. But when you're struggling in addiction, depression, anxiety, loss, whatever it is, the devil uses shame to keep us quiet, and then then we're frozen, and then we're isolated, and that's where the devil tries to get us. And so I'm just trying to teach a generation of people, young and old, to reach in for people, because our God kept reaching in for me over and over and over again. I will say, though, really quickly, there is a part of that small percentage that I said of, you have to do the work. Because after I lost my mama, Cory, after I lost my mama, David, I was bitter. I would look at other people that their mother beat cancer, and I'm ashamed to say it, but I mean, I was like, why did they beat it? My mama didn't beat it. And I looked at myself in the mirror in my house in Nashville before I lost it, and I remember looking at myself in the mirror, and I was like, man, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Like, you got to change something. You are bitter. This is not you. Your mama named you Rachel Joy, and you are not joyful. You are a bitter Betty. Like, you got to. And I, with God's help, but my shovel and my work, I went about doing the work to become better, not bitter.
Was there a certain moment that you kind of looked yourself? You say you looked yourself in the mirror at that time,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
throughout that time, was there a scripture that you may have leaned on?
I would say it wasn't one particular scripture. What I did. Have you ever seen the movie The War Room?
Yes. The prayer movie?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
I highly recommend it, Cory, and to your audience, go rent it now. You'll be ripping out a closet by nightfall. You know what I mean? Like, I ripped out a closet. I had a storage room closet in my upstairs, first house, beautiful, Nashville, it was popping, like, and I ripped out this closet and I made it a prayer room. And on the wall, I would put, I had my candle, I had my chair, I had my pad, and to sit there, and I'd have music, and I'd bring my Bible, but I'd have stickers on the wall, post-it notes of everybody that asked me to pray. And when a prayer was answered, I'd let it fall to the ground. But I'd go in there every day and I'd touch the prayers. And I remember and one of them was for my mom's cancer. And I told a friend, I said, I'm so mad, that prayer didn't get answered. And she said, oh, yes, it did. She said, she is whole and she is healed and she is in heaven and you will see her again. I was like, wow, and that's where I think um, as believers, we grieve differently. We should grieve differently. I miss my mama tremendously. I miss my daddy. I miss all my people that I've lost, but we're going to see him again. We're going to see him again in heaven. And if you don't know God, that person, you may think they're just gone. No, but I'm going to see my mama again. And that brings me great peace.
How do you speak to these different colleges and NFL teams and everything like that? Like, you're doing it obviously because you are a believer. You're doing it through a Christian lens. How do you do it without getting too preachy? Because I feel like that could be a hesitation. That's part of the reason why this particular show exists, so people can just go ahead and no, we go all the way in, like, start preaching, but I think sometimes we're like, oh, I don't know if I really want to offend people and step over a line. But obviously all of this perspective you're giving them is from a Christian lens. So how do you kind of balance that without, like I said, getting a little too preachy and then trying to have an altar call at LSU or something?
Yeah, no, so again, great questions. When I'm in a college, I usually don't, I'll say God or whatever you believe, right? Like, I'm inclusive, I'm like, whoever you believe created the heavens and earth. So this is so funny to say out loud, but I was friends with Bobby Bowden, and he used to say to me, I'm gonna do a terrible impersonation of him, but he's like, Shug, he's like, you preaching the Bible without ever preaching the Bible. And I said, oh yes, sir, I do. And he said, you ain't got to say his name. All of your messaging, all of your lessons, all of the things that you're teaching are biblical without ever saying his name. And that goes back to, I've seen it before where people have talked about, I want to preach the gospel without ever opening my mouth. Like, how am I treating you at the grocery store? How am I flipping somebody off in traffic? How am I treating my husband? How am I treating my kids? Now, look, we're all going to mess up. That's why I'll call somebody back and say, I'm so sorry. I was hangry. I was, wasn't you. I teach people we're not all going to get it right. Let's do this work here so that we're not spilling our junk on people. But secondarily, when we don't get it right, go apologize, go make it right, and then be better. And so, no, there are certain places that are, I know that I can, and some places where some schools out west, Northwest College, a huge college, said explicitly asked me, hey, I know you're very, pro God on your socials. You're not going to talk about God during this talk, are you? And I said, no, I won't, And so there are places I know I can, and then there's places that ask me not to, and then there's places that I'll ride that line. But hopefully my aroma, hopefully my whole energy force, I want people to see. I heard Bob Goff say this once, the author of Love Does. I want to leak Jesus. That's it. I want to leak Jesus.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know when you go through the different levels of professionalism, you got college and you move up to the pros now. Is there a
Yeah.
difference in those rooms? Do you feel like there's a difference when it comes to the comprehension of what you're speaking about?
Oh, that's a good question too. Y'all need to stop asking such good questions.
You notice what we do? We broadcasters. This is what we do.
So that's so good. I remember when this is hilarious. So when I went to speak to the Jacksonville Jaguars, I had been trying to get into the NFL for 7 years. So it was breaking into the NFL. Now, what was interesting about that was there were 4 or 5 players in the room that had heard me speak. Christian Kirk, the punter from Baylor, they knew me, right? And so when they introduced me, 3 or 4 or 5 players already knew me. And I don't even remember how I started the talk, but how I started it, like I was like, one of the things I say in my talk and wherever I go is, hey, listen, there's a few ground rules. One, you ain't got to be quiet. If you like something I say, you can snap, clap, run around, holler, you can take a lap around the building. And that lets people do this right away, like they feel free. They don't have to be stoic. They don't have to be quiet. And so with them, I'll tell you a little inside with them. The people at the Jags, this was not this year, last year, they said, no pressure, but you're the only thing standing in between them and the bye week. And so they said, good luck. Like, oh my God, and so I'm like, and people ask me all the time, they're like, do you still get nervous? I'm like, heck yes, I get nervous in a good way, because if I don't, to me, that means I don't have reverence for what I do
Hmm.
or respect, or, my mom used to say, don't get too big for your britches. That means I got too big for my britches. And so I was like, nervous and excited and all of the things. Well, I go in there, and one of the things, and I had gone through with their psychologist and their head of player engagement, like what they needed, what they were struggling with, different things. And so one of the things I did with them was I had them close their eyes and envision how they wanted their bye week to go. Who did they say no to when they asked for money? Who did they say yes to, or said, I can't talk about that right now? When it, came to, I want to start a business, or somebody came in here. Did you go fishing with your grandpa? Did you take naps? Did you play with your kids? Did you see your auntie? Like envision what makes your soul feel good. And the other thing that I teach on is, especially with men, nobody can respect boundaries that you don't tell them about. So, Cory, if you don't want to go somewhere and you end up saying yes to it, and then you get irritated and grumpy because you didn't really want to go there, and you're mad at that person, but you're really mad at yourself, you can't, you got to, men especially have to learn to express boundaries. No, I don't want to spend the money. No, I don't want to invest in your business. No, I don't want to go there. No, those people don't make me feel good. And when you do that, guess who you honor? Yourself and also God. And so we talked a lot about those boundaries, and it was powerful. And I got asked back because afterwards, a bunch of the players on the way out, right? Remember, I'm the only thing standing in between them and their bye week. They stayed around, they hugged, they cried, they got numbers, they got books. Because that's just what I do. That it's the after as much as the talk for me. It's the relationship, just not the talk. And so the head of player engagement there is a dear friend of mine and he was like, man, that's how I knew like you had made a difference. They weren't rushing out. They were waiting to talk to you.
Yeah, I mean that's so true though, right, David? Like setting those boundaries is something I feel like a lot of men, you speak about like not spending bread or not going out to certain places or taking care of the people that you probably should be taking care of. But I feel like as men, it's kind of like we feel like it's a responsibility to do that because it's what I know for me. Like that's what I was taught growing up from my father. He's the old school guy. From Alabama. He's back in the '60s, '50s. Like he saw a lot. And all he learned was provide, provide, provide. And if you're not able to provide, then what is your case as a man? And so, is that something that a common theme? I'm guessing that you see a lot, especially at the professional level, guys that are having to provide for a lot of people and feel like that's where their worth is at.
Ooh, Lord of mercy. We're gonna have to have a part 2 of this podcast. It's gonna have to happen because we're gonna have to break this down. The talk that I give to the talk that I give to that I'm giving at the combine and the talk that I've given to men the past couple of years, I've actually named it. It's called The Soul of a Man. And at
Mm.
first blush, you might go, an unhealed man. And I'm not mad at an unhealed man. He's just not healed. He's not in a state of healing. First of all, here's the thing. Ain't none of us healed with an ED. We're healing. We're either healing or we're stagnant. Healing or we're stagnant. We ain't going to be, there's only one healed man, and his name is Jesus Christ, right? And he died on a cross for us. The rest of us are just in a state of healing if you are healing, or you're stagnant and you're stuck, right? And so the soul of a man, so that's the talk that I give to men, and it's all about healthy boundaries, relationships, loving yourself. I talk to men all over the country like no one has ever talked to me, and I bet your daddy would say the same thing. No one ever told me growing up how important it was to love my own soul, to love myself, that God made me in his image, that I am not an accident, ain't nothing wrong with me, that yes, you can love yourself and recognize your faults, but inherently there's nothing wrong, and men are like, it's like watching them come alive. Like they're like, what? I'm supposed to love myself? I'm supposed to do soul care? What is that? What's self-care? What's soul care? What does that look like? And so to an unhealed person or a stagnant person, I've had men say to me, you talk to men? Yes, I talk to men. You know why? Because I'm soft, I'm warm, I'm maternal. I remind you of somebody in your family that you loved. And I talk about the things that a lot of coaches, male coaches, aren't talking to them about, and that is their mental health, the love of their own soul, finding what sets their soul on fire, healthy boundaries, relationships, joy, and it is mind blowing for men.
Not only do you speak to athletes, but
Yeah.
you recently spoke to men who are incarcerated. How did that opportunity come about? And then tell us how many men gave their life to Christ that day.
You, Lord of mercy. So I've been in, I think, 7 times in 4 different prisons, 3 or 4 different prisons, and it came about through an amazing ministry, and they have a magazine called Victorious Living, and they put me on the cover and told my story. And I used to be an addict, and it was the first time that I ever fully talked about it. I've talked about it here and there, but I just gotten married, and I asked my husband for his grace because I felt the calling to go into prisons. And so they printed the story, and I think they print 15,000 magazines, and they go all over the country where they get passed in the prison. And so they gave me the opportunity 2 falls ago to go into a maximum security prison, and then from there I kept going and going and going. And I went so Christmas, David, I was supposed to go early, like the first 2 weeks, and something happened. The state had a power outage, like a scheduled power outage today. And I told the chaplain, because I also coach and he's one of my clients, and I said, I told the chaplain, I said, oh no, the devil ain't stopping us with no scheduled power outage. I said, can you ask them when we can go back? And he said yes. And so he came back to me and he said, the only date we can go back is It's December 21st, right before Christmas. And I said, I'll be there. I'll be there. I will be there with bells on. So if I can be one of the last people to speak to them from the outside, right before Christmas, and bring the good news and remind them of Christ and remind them of the birth of Christ and what he did for them and that he loves them and he does not see them as prisoners. And so we talked about that. I gave an altar call at the end and 34 men got saved that day. And I just, I've been in the biggest stages, biggest moments. But to me, that moment superseded any of those. 34 souls wrote their name in the Lamb's Book of Life. And this man came up to me afterwards and he said, an older man, he reminded me a lot of my dad. And he said, I haven't made amends to the people that I hurt yet. And he said, I'm going to write that letter. I'm going to say I'm sorry. And I told him, I said, look, the people, I've had one ask me, what if the person isn't alive? Like maybe they murdered them. And I said, you write their next of kin. And I said, here's the deal. It doesn't matter how they take it. What matters is your posture, your heart posture, what you do with it. And as long as you're contrite and you love God, you're writing it to clear to do the right thing, to be the person that God wants you to be. But it's not your responsibility whether they forgive you or not. That's really not on you. Your responsibility is you and God. And so 34 lives. I just sat in my car afterwards. I just cried like a baby. That is kingdom work. That is all of heaven cheered. And that's better than getting, a $10 million check here on earth.
That's mind blowing just hearing that. That's mind blowing just hearing that. Hey, when you come down to talk to the Buccaneers, you let me know.
Yes.
I can get a little bit of the talk,
Yes.
I'll just have a little bit. I want to ask you one last thing before we get out of here, because we've taken up so much of your time, and we thank you so much for the time that you've given us. Heisman voter is part of your resume, and I'm just curious, as someone who has Heisman voter part of their resume, right? Your thoughts on Travis Hunter, the player he is, what he was able to do, not just at Colorado, but Jackson State.
Yeah, a phenomenal player and a special one of a kind talent, and not one that we're going to likely see either ever again or for a really, really long time. And I cannot wait to see what he does at the next level. I can't wait to see what happens with Dion and where that all plays out. And, just getting his name mentioned in, for his coach, just getting his name mentioned in different things, then bumps him up over here. But, what he's done for Colorado, and do you make the jump back? And do you wait for an even bigger position to open up in college? But so special. And I love, from a faith perspective, how they are just unashamed, right? Like unashamed of the program, unashamed as human beings of who they are. But I have a bonus son, and he just turned 16, and then I have one that's 20. And with the 16-year-old particularly, we would watch football on Saturdays, and that was one of his favorite players. And the only thing I don't like, and I'll say this, is and it'll make him better, because we talked about this at the beginning of the interview, is just the scrutiny that he got, the scrutiny with his girlfriend, and I noticed some of that stuff, but like after games, like they caught her at a bad time and her face looked weird. Well, that was a snippet, right? Like we get snippets of things. We don't know the whole story. We don't know the context. And so I just prayed for them, throughout that whole time. I know this is going off topic, but throughout that whole time after the Heisman, I prayed for them, because it was like total strangers felt like they needed to do him a favor and tell him about his girlfriend, and I'm like, dude, come on. But that's part of today of being in the spotlight. And that, before we get out of here, is another thing that I do, to be very, very blunt. We talk about hard things. We talk about relations. We talk about relationships. We talk about waiting, and unwrapping a gift, a woman like a gift. We talk about even waiting for marriage, and I even get to talk to guys who are active at this moment, and it is wow, it's a really, really deep conversation to talk about. And one of the things we have had conversations about is, what do you struggle with? And I have had a number of players tell me privately, and one plays in the NFL now, and big school, and he came to me privately and he said, I've got a problem staying faithful. I've got a beautiful girlfriend. She's gorgeous, but I can't stay faithful. So what we did is I have a mental health battle plan. And if you'll put this in the show notes, mentalhealthbattleplan.com, it's completely free. It teaches you how to have a battle plan. Why do we have a financial plan? Why do we have an inclement weather plan? Why do we have, God forbid, the shooter plan? But we ain't got a plan for when crap hits the fan. It's completely free. And it helps you go ahead and get ready for when you have intrusive thoughts or anxiety or depression. You can send it to everybody you know. So I was talking to this player and I said, you need to have a battle plan for when you are dealt with temptation. Be careful for the women who've been dropping in your DMs, especially when you have another girl. But I want the woman, the queen that you can take home to mama, that reminds you of your granny, that loves you when you're down and out and when you're riding high. So this is kind of some of the other stuff that we get into that's deep and beautiful.
We got to mic drop it right there. We gonna have to, because that's ain't nothing else left to say. That's we got to mic drop it right there. You mentioned it real quick. We will have a part 2.
We need that part 2.
Yeah. Rachel Joy will be back for a part 2. She's going to be back on the Believer's Bench. Thank you so much for your time today. Real quickly, go ahead, plug your socials and your podcast as well so people know where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking to people. I love having conversations. So Rachel Baribeau at any of my socials, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I have a newsletter that's in my links. I send that out once a week. It's awesome. Don't spam you. It's full of great, great information. Everybody should be starting a newsletter. Whatever business you're in, you need to be starting a newsletter. And then I have a podcast, called the Joy Starters Podcast that comes out every Sunday. And then I'm working on book number 2. Here is book number 1, and it became a bestseller in the fall of 2023 called Relentless Joy. You can get it wherever books are sold. And then I'm working on book number 2 right now.
Well, we can't wait till that one drops. And again, we will have Rachel back for part 2. If you enjoyed this conversation, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. You stayed here this long. Might as well hit the subscribe and follow button. And share this with a family member. Share this with a friend. Especially share it with the men in your life, because one share can change a life. All right. So until next Wednesday, we will see you again right here on Game Day Grace. Be easy and be blessed, everybody.